So to the jostle for the post of Senate President and a cascade of growing support, apparently, for Senator Godswill Akpabio, former Minister of the Niger Delta, former Governor of Akwa State, and the man who appears to be inching closer to becoming President of the Nigerian Senate. According to his backers, he's now got more than half the total number of senators openly supporting him. And they include the man they call one of the landlords at the National Assembly, the senator representing Borno South, Mohammed Ali Ndume. He's been there since 2003, first as a member of the House of Representatives and later as a senator, where he became Senate Majority Leader and Chairman of the Senate Committee on the Army. Senator Ndume was himself in the race to become Senate President, but decided to pull out and is now drumming up support for the candidacy of Senator Akpabio. His party, the APC, is of course the majority party in the Red Chamber with 59 members elect, while the 6 opposition parties have 50 senators elect. This suggests they could play a major role in the battle for leadership positions in the upper house, and that the one for Senate President could be fought as an inter-party, not an intra-party contest. So can the opposition come together to lead a seriously revolutionary effort to take popular charge of the leadership of the Senate? Or will it be the dominating APC as a direct consequence of what some see as inegalitarian election outcomes? Or is there a hard-boiled compromise somewhere in that chamber, as we saw in the 8th Senate? Meanwhile, to help us explore the stories and issues of the day, we have the current affairs analyst, professor of communications and deputy dean of the postgraduate school at Bayes University in Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, the journalist, political affairs commentator and Arise News analyst, Dr. Constance Ikokwu. Plus, we have the journalist and public affairs commentator, Lemmy Ughebe, who is also the executive director of Make a Difference Initiative, a civil society organization that promotes transparency, accountability, and good governance. Thank you very much indeed to all of you for joining us. So let me come to you first, Mr. Ughebe. You're a man with an ear to the ground as far as the National Assembly goes. I mean, what are you hearing about how things are looking at the Senate in terms of the presidential race?
Okay, thanks for having me, Charles. I think it's getting increasingly clearer. As at last week, when I also had cause to appear on this channel, it was clear, and I said clearly that the president-elect or incoming president has his eyes on Godswill Akpabio becoming the Senate President, to partner with him as Senate President. Now, with all the politim undercurrents going on, it's increasingly clear. Before now, the 2 contenders for this position had been Senator Ojiuzo Kalu and Godswill Akpabio. Of course, because of a quiet arrangement to, they've not come out officially to say they are zoning it, as in the APC, they are zoning this to the south, south, or southeast. But of course, the groundswell of public opinion is that since we have the president-elect and his vice as coming from the southwest and this northeast, it's only proper to either go the way of the southeast or the south-south. And therefore, it's not a surprise now that even though APC has not come out with an official protocol on zoning as regards this position, that Godswill Akpabio is actually a strong frontrunner and is increasingly winning a lot of support. For instance, Senator Ali Ndume is declaring support for him now. It's not a surprise because, of course, Senator Ali Ndume could not possibly have been genuinely in a race to become Senate President when he's from the Northeast, where the Vice President elect is from. So yes, Akpabio is really coasting home to victory, as it were. Is getting a lot of support, and of course, people from the other parties outside the ruling party are already mending fences, and of course, aligning to that fact that they would support Senator Akpabio to become Senate President, especially that it balances out also beyond the fact that yes, he's competent, beyond the fact that the issue of Christian Muslim becoming president-elect and vice president, certainly it's only natural to find a balancing act to make sure that whoever comes in is not just from the South, but is also a Christian. And Akpabio fits that bill. This is, however, not without prejudice to the fact that I also think that even if Akpabio emerges, the moral burden, not legal burden because the courts have cleared him, but the moral burden of the manner in which he emerged, having picked 2 tickets, having picked the presidential primary ticket, and eventually turned out to, through the courts, get the ticket that qualified him to become a senator again. That is a matter of morality. That is a matter that occupies the groundswell of public opinion among the people of Nigerians, even if the courts had found a way to legitimize his picking that ticket and becoming Senate President. So it will cost him to victory. I am certain that that is the position of majority of the people in the Senate.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Lemmy, for setting that out. Obviously, the vote hasn't taken place yet, so there is still a race that is underway, and there are people who are competing against him still. They haven't all dropped out, so we're going to have to see how things evolve. But you're right in the sense that people like Senator Abiodun, who is seen as a fairly strong force inside the Senate, has come out in support of him. And according to Mr. Dume, Mr. Akpabio has got more than 60 senators now in support of him. That's more than half the number in that chamber. But let me come to you, Professor Adeniyi. What is your assessment of what is needed to be a really good Senate president? Would there need to be someone who can stand up against the executive, or should the person be more of a cooperating arm in order to keep things running and ticking over smoothly?
Okay, excellent, Charles. I think it might not be so much of textbook points, or maybe points that are necessarily cast in stone, but it just requires that to be a very good Senate president, you probably need some suaveness, ability to negotiate, ability to be consultative and deliberative, realizing that you're going to be the chairman of a coordinate arm of government in a democracy. In a democracy, ideally, there's a trinity: the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. The Senate President chairs the National Assembly, which is the legislative arm, and in some contexts, the Congress, as the case could be. But in our own case, we know the kind of democracy that we are building still very fragile, still needing consultation. But in saying that this Senate President should be one that is consultative, does not mean that the person should be a Lilliputian, does not mean that the person should be slavish. Requires the ability to be assertive as well. But I dare say brilliance and intelligence and experience are very, very necessary. But in the political atmosphere, we do know that rigidity does not necessarily pay. And sometimes we have made a mistake that when Senate President or legislative leadership, or the leadership in the legislature is somewhat, given to compromise, to consensus building, sometimes we mistake that for being condescending or for being slavish, or being a Lilliputian. I don't really think so. Sometimes it may not require confrontation. Sometimes it's about understanding and tolerance. The arms are not supposed to be at war with themselves. They're supposed to be cooperative to have an understanding towards the same goal, realizing that the one that has the judiciary overall, has an edge, maybe the first among equal, has an edge. He embodies the vision and mission of the administration in contest. He only needs the other arms, to toe his line largely, but against the background of the fact that he too has to approach these other arms with some level of respect, because they have a constitutional role to play. But talking about the way they're going to emerge, it's not too different from how we have seen them in the past, from the 14th Senate President, the way Lawal emerged, understanding, compromise, I haven't tried 4 years earlier, and now we're going to have the next Senate President, who's going to be the 15th Senate President. I mean, it's not too different. We have seen build up through horse trading, and there are reasonable pointers to who is likely to emerge. Of course, we cannot be definitive until the election is held, because other forces are still at play, other influential personalities are still wielding their influence, and of course, we cannot discontinue what happened in the period of Saraki era, how Saraki emerged, although that has been a tough lesson that subsequently they've tried to avoid, but of course, we cannot still rule out that, experience playing up again. Otherwise, it's just going to be something that we have to be patient and watch, see how it plays out, getting more interesting, clear. There's a signpost of who is likely to emerge, but like I said, we cannot be too sure until the D-Day comes.
Yes, thank you for that. Let me come to you, Dr. Ikokwu. I mean, because when we talk about all these, shenanigans going on in the National Assembly, the question becomes who ultimately decides who emerges as Senate President? Will it be Bola Ahmed Tinubu? Will it be the senators themselves?
Charles, that's a big question because the Senate can be a very volatile chamber because especially the seat of the Senate President. Why? It's in view of the fact that the Senate President is third in line of succession to the President. That means if anything happens, the Vice President takes over. If anything happens to the Vice President, then it's the Senate President. So it's a very important position. It's also very influential. And when you come to the upper chamber, the Senate, you have a lot of egos. You have a lot of powerful people. You have a lot of former governors. You have a lot of people that have been there for almost 20 years. So you have to manage a lot. Most times, I think that Senate members want to elect or appoint their own person. They want it to come from consensus, from a lot of lobbying, amongst the members, someone that is likable, someone that's charismatic, someone that will carry them along, especially because the Senate President presides and guides proceedings in the chamber. So it's very important to them. At the same time, we have seen in the past where, the executive arm usually intervenes or interferes in who becomes the Senate President. And what comes to mind is during President Olusegun Obasanjo's tenure, his 8-year tenure, he went through 5 Senate presidents, starting from Evans Enwerem, and then there was Chuba Kadibo, there was Adolphus Wabara, and then Anyim Pius Anyim, and finally Ken Nnamani. It was a very explosive time between the executive arm and the legislative arm. I mean, they were changing members and Senate presidents. It was tough. Obasanjo was intervening because the president also wants a Senate president that he can work with that sometimes is amenable to the party position. And which is why I'm hearing that the president-elect, Bola Tinubu, is interested now in who becomes the Senate president. They say he is tilting towards Akpabio. However, I'm also hearing that Akpabio, although he has backers, he also has a groundswell of people who are against him for so many different reasons. So it's not going to be an easy one for him. At the end of the day, it's a very powerful position, and we're going to see who eventually emerges. But I think that the members of the Senate will have a hand in who becomes the Senate president, and maybe they'll reach an agreement with the president on that.
Good points. And let me deliver some rather disappointing news. We've been told that Senator Ali Ndume is stuck in Port Harcourt, so he didn't actually leave Port Harcourt. The flight was rained out, basically. It was raining heavily in Port Harcourt, then it started raining in Abuja, and it just became a bit of a risk to take a flight, and so they've been grounded in Port Harcourt. So I'm afraid I'm stuck with you guys. But nevertheless, your analysis is so brilliant that I don't think we're going to have any problems there at all. And let me come to you, Lemmy Ughebe, because you know a lot about what goes on inside the National Assembly. I mean, some have suggested that it is quite possible that the opposition may be able to come together and play an important role in trying to decide who emerges, not just as Senate President, but in all the other leadership positions in the Senate. Assess for us the strengths of the opposition in the Senate and what difference they could make to the race if they came together as one united bloc, bearing in mind what happened in the 8th Senate when we had Ekwere Madu emerge as the deputy, and then of course the man who emerged as the Senate President himself, who was not really the choice of the executive, I mean of the President, but he in the end emerged as Senate President.
Okay, the operative word there is if the other parties are able to come together, and that if is the magic word. Already the ruling or progressive Congress has majority, 60 members. And the people who are involved right now, from the president elect and governors of the APC, and even some governors outside the APC, they, of course, you know how much influence they wield. So I really know, I know and I believe rather that what it's playing out is just the horse trading that the opposition parties would be doing in order to maybe have certain concession in terms of key appointments to key committees. It's in the race for speakership and deputy speakership, the other parties, the opposition parties may be able to rally together with their numbers because they have more impressive numbers there. But at the Senate level, what is just required is enough horse trading to be able to calm nerves, even within the party. And within the party, really, the sentiment is the fact that it just must go to the southeast, to the south. Now the southeast is there, the south-south is there. Now if you look at the south-south and look at what Senator Godswill Akpabio represents, you know that he still has a lot more followership and goodwill of the people of the South-South, as opposed to what Senator Orjiuzo Kalu, for instance, has. So we know that the governors favor the emergence of Akpabio. The governors, both the ones who are in and the ones who are now in the Senate and the ones who are out, they are, of course, negotiating with members of the Senate from their own states, and the effort is, of course, with the blessings of the president-elect. He wants to work with Akpabio, and the governors in majority are also keen on that. So, of course, they are building bridges of friendship, and the chances are very slim that the opposition parties will be able to come together to torpedo that. So it's for Akpabio to maybe sell himself more, do a lot of humble negotiations and discussions. Like we say, horse trading. We say that finality is not a word in politics. 24 hours is enough for tsunami to occur, and Akpabio, who is coasting on to victory, may not eventually achieve that. However, we've learned, the politicians, the president-elect is a very sagacious politician. You know that. We all know his credentials. And he's not going to make the mistake that was made in the 8th Assembly. Even President Muhammadu Buhari, who initially could not be minded about who emerged in the 8th Senate at the beginning, regretted what happened with those who emerged. And so by the 9th Assembly, they were able to get the kind of people they wanted to work with. And that brings me to the fact of the issue about if the leadership of the National Assembly needs to be adversarial, needs to be antagonistic or too strong and all that. We do not need that. We just need people who would be competent, people who would have the desire and loyalty to be over and above the loyalty to president. It should be loyalty to country. It should be above all that they are able to see that the work of the National Assembly and the work of the legislators and of course the principal officers is not necessarily to antagonize the executive. They work together. It's supposed to be that they work as partners who are offering checks and balances. We cannot have the situation that we have in the 9th Assembly where the Senate President, outgoing Senate President, announced clearly to us that he was going to support every bill, every request that President Buhari brought before them because the president has good intentions towards Nigeria. It wasn't about the intention that should guide whatever is happening now. It should be, how does that bill, how does that request help the Nigerian people and the Nigerian state?
I'm going to have to interrupt you there. We'll have a lot more from you and from the rest of the panel here when we come back. You're watching Arise Prime Time. Plenty more to come. Stay with us. Welcome back to Arise Prime Time, where we offer perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Well, that's my name, isn't it? And this is the part of the program where we press pause and dig a bit deeper behind the headlines with our guest analysts who we invite to help us explore the stories and issues of the day. You met them earlier, and they're still here. We have the current affairs analyst, professor of communications and deputy dean of the postgraduate school at Bayes University in Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, the journalist, political affairs commentator and Arise News analyst, Dr. Constance Ikokwu. Plus we have the journalist and public affairs commentator, Lemmy Ughebe, who is also the executive director of Make a Difference Initiative, a civil society organization that promotes transparency, accountability, and good governance. Thank you very much indeed to all of you for staying with us. And Lemmy, I didn't mean to interrupt you before we went on a break, but we had to go on a break. So you can finish your thoughts briefly before we move on.
Basically, we need a Senate president and a deputy who are people whose loyalty will be to country and people who would know that their responsibility is to actually help the executive to get it right. Not what we have in the 9th Assembly, where the president will just bring anything and according to the Senate president is just allowed to fly. And the check and balance, the essence of the Trinitarian system, which is executive, judiciary, and legislature checking each other. It's not there. And every time people agree on you are with 10 people and they are agreeing with you, it means that they are not really doing it right. So we must have a Senate leadership that is hell-bent on making sure that it guides the executive into doing the right thing. And the right thing is to ensure that the Nigerian people and the Nigerian state is best served with policies and bills and requests that will ensure that the dividends of democracy is delivered to the people and we do not borrow Nigeria blind like we have currently.
Well, absolutely. That's an exceedingly good point. The facts, of course, is that oftentimes in the process of choosing Professor Adeniyi, those considerations seem to be relegated? Because, I mean, from what we're hearing, I've talked to quite a lot of the senators, quite a number of them in Port Harcourt at the moment, stuck there because of being rained out. They've been fairly emphatic and insistent that money politics has reared its head again in this race for the Senate presidency. I mean, disappointing but not surprising.
Yeah, but obviously, and of course, you can hardly put your hands on that. You can hardly get to the roots of that, because it's usually done in hush tones, done behind the cover, if at all it is true, because we never always will have evidence, so we can't really be sure of that, of course, but we know there are reasonable suspicion most of the time to expect that there will be some levels of transaction, and sometimes it may not necessarily be in cash, sometimes it could also be in kind, sometimes it could be as a result of maybe some kind of promise in the future.
Horse trading.
Yeah, horse trading, and that speaks to the character of our democracy as one that is still patrimonial, still about reward, still about loyalty, still about promise, give and take, hardly about merit, hardly about potentials, and capacity and ability of individuals, But again, this is not to generalize. We want to also add that there are quite a number of politicians who are above board, who are salutary, but the question is, we always want, those ones that are above board, that are doing exceedingly well, to be more than we presently have, where it's a question of they being few, where their presence is few and far between, just like the angels visit. We want more of them so that they can rub off on the system and impact positively. So above all things, Charles, yes, we are concerned about how they emerge. Our focus should also be on bringing about enhancing good governance, because that's the ultimate goal. And good governance, it's seamless administration that could be beneficial to the people, because that's the reason for which leaders are elected in the first instance. But we have to also understand that in the circumstance in which we are talking, you have highlighted possibility of transaction. There's also the question of party preference. The preference of the party hierarchy, who they want, is going to play out in who emerges at the end of the day. Then, of course, the subtle, the overt or covert preference of the president-elect will also matter. But I want to believe that he's not going to come out overtly. It's going to be subtle. It's going to be subterranean, maybe through body language, or he's going to use some of his trusted aides, to vet and approve one of the contending parties. But we cannot also discountenance the fact that quite a number of them are actually very, very competent, going by their pedigree. They've been ranking senators, they've been governors, and they've been there over the years, So in terms of pedigree, in terms of qualification, none of them can be disregarded. But what matters is what they do, what they bring to the table by the time they get into power. Now, when they get into power, we expect that they would not lose focus, concentrate on good governance, realizing that the legislature is the clinical symbol of democracy. Without the legislature, of course, we cannot be talking about democracy. That's the symbol. And that's the arm that's the youngest of the Trinity. And that's the arm we're still trying to build in the attempt to consolidate or deepen our democracy. And that's the arm that we should continue to nurture. And in nurturing it, we have to be concerned again about personalities, that lead that arm. Because it is the intellectual arm, it is the arm that dissects problems, and it is the arm that provides solutions for the execution by the executive. But our democracy is still tottering. We're still struggling to build the legislature. But going forward in the next administration, we have to be mindful of how we regard or disregard the National Assembly.
Right.
Because it remains core, to the systematization and the deepening of democracy, as the case could be.
Okay. And just coming off the back of that, Dr. Ikokwu, I mean, the knob of it seems to be that it is important for experience, integrity, and competence to be there, sort of the hallmarks for assessing someone going forward. But what about the issue of zoning? Should that be allowed to come into the mix?
Well, for many Nigerians, zoning shouldn't be an issue, because we have a country that should normally focus on competence. However, given the way that politics is played in the country, zoning becomes a major factor in everything that we're doing. So for instance, in this presidency, we had at a time, the president came from the north, The Senate President came from the North. The Chief Justice of the Federation came from the North. And a lot of people were uncomfortable, and so many other top positions. So you would see that this time around, people are saying that it's important to balance everything out, so that people feel a sense of belonging, and they feel that they are accommodated in their own country. But beyond that, the National Assembly as it is, especially the Senate, does not have a good reputation among Nigerians. There is the perception that it is a body where people receive high packages, very high salaries, and literally do nothing, and go on breaks often, and do not give back, and do not add value to the nation. That is the perception. So this is very critical, especially against the backdrop of an election that was hotly contested during a time where we had economic crisis. So people want to see a National Assembly that will be focusing on the economy, that would hold the president to account. Yes, it's important for the president, or the executive arm and the legislative arm, to collaborate when need be. It's also critical for within the National Assembly to work across bipartisan lines. At the same time, nobody wants a National Assembly that kowtows to the president, like I think the one we have that is leaving, like a rubber stamp legislature that doesn't have a backbone, doesn't have muscles, and is just saying, yes, 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 Mr. President. No one wants to see that. No one wants to hear that. So they're looking forward to a Senate president that, yes, when need be, stand up to the president, speak for the people, speak for the Nigerian people, because you are paid by them, and that's who you're supposed to serve on that seat. So let's see what plays out with regard to who gets the seat. But I think overall, the bigger picture is we want a National Assembly that is robust, that is vigorous, that is giving back to the country, and people feel like you're paid and you're doing the job.
That's an excellent analysis. Well, let's move away from the Senate and all the shenanigans going on there as they prepare to finally vote, or eventually vote in a new president. Let me come to you, Lemmy Ughebe, and let's talk about Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who is the president-elect. He has been in Rivers State to commission a flyover project, but as with all things like that, his visit has been trailed by a lot of other things that are not necessarily connected to a flyover road. He promised to work for the country and said he would not marginalize any part when it comes to development, irrespective of who voted for him or who didn't. So what's your reaction to that?
That's very presidential. That's really very presidential, and we must applaud incoming President Bola Ahmed Tinubu for finding the right messaging and issuing the right messaging. A president is president for all. Yes, loyalty to party, but the moment you win the elections, you must go beyond party lines into wanting to do what you are elected to do, which is to serve the people, the entire people of Nigerians, regardless of who voted you, who didn't vote. So I'm glad that the next incoming president from the APC is issuing a different narrative from what the soon to become former president, Muhammadu Buhari, took over, when he said that clearly the people of the Southeast didn't vote him, and as such, he's not going to, he's going to deal with them at the level at which they gave him votes. And unfortunately, of course, to a large extent, he made good those promises he made about the fact that those who didn't vote him, he was not going to do much around them. Unfortunately, that's the reason, again, a lot of the uprising in places like the Southeast, agitations in the Southeast, and that accounts for why, when talking about the Senate, the next Senate president, groundswell of opinions of many people is that ordinarily we should use the opportunity of the elections in the Senate to assuage the feelings, the agitation of the people of the Southeast. Unfortunately, as it is, that is not what we are having now, even though, yes, there's also a front runner from the Southeast. Unfortunately, you also need to be at a level where your people see you as representative enough of their own agitation and their own interests. That is not my reading right now. So from Port Harcourt, the president-elect, incoming president, has issued a proper messaging. We expect that he should be able to walk the talk. It's our fervent desire that those is going to appoint, and I think that he should, beyond the jamboree, the mecca, political mecca that Port Harcourt turned into, and most of the people lobbying are in Port Harcourt right now, we want to hope that the president-elect will step in and match his words with action. We need a Nigeria, a polarized Nigeria is what we have now. We need a Nigeria that a president can galvanize back and firm it up into unity.
Okay, and bring everybody together, and that's absolutely important. And Professor Adeniyi, of course, if we microanalyze what he actually said, he was talking specifically about development. But of course, in Nigeria, it's not just about projects, is it? It's also about appointments.
Oh yeah, I think we alluded to it somewhat earlier on, that we still play largely primordial politics, patrimonial politics, I beg your pardon, politics that is about reward, that is about what's in there for me, give and take kind of politics, which underemphasize or minimize the importance of merit, and of course, service delivery at the end of the day. We have seen it in some climes, how they grew. Of course, Singapore is a ready example, how Lee Kuan Yew was mindful of those he recruited to assist him in governance. They were easily identified as very competent people, well-educated people who would have had sound pedigree, and they were not likely to deviate. People doubt, yes, they were political, but of course, their competence, their ability overrode, their political parts. And of course, we shouldn't forget that, if we have to achieve results in the next administration, the Bola Tinubu administration, that is, everything shouldn't just be about politics. That was the bane, that has been the bane of this administration, where we saw less of technocrats manning critical sectors. And of course, the results became obvious in some of those sectors. We saw some good attempts in the Obasanjo period to inject or to spice up the rank of his ministers with technocrats. And of course, we also saw the result. To some extent, Jonathan was mindful of injecting technocrats into his administration. And of course, those are the people that really deliver. And they will not be talking about, they will not be playing politics. Everything shouldn't just be on the basis of what did you contribute to my election. And of course, I'm going to determine, what you get based on your contribution. We're talking about result, and results needs to be concrete, But we also have to be mindful of the fact that democracy isn't just be about freedom, happiness, and prosperity, but it's also about the tangible, and those tangibles will come if there are physical development that will impact, on the well-being of the people. But over the years, yes, we have made some attempts at development in terms of reflected through physical developments like infrastructure, utilities, but we could have done more if we were concerned about the caliber of people that were being brought into government. Recruitment shouldn't just essentially be nepotic. It shouldn't just be on the basis of classifiers that we're aware of, religion, region, ethnicity, and all of that. And even if you want to be concerned about that, there's no section, there's no religion, there's no region that cannot boast of very competent individuals. It's important, yes, you may want to reward, you may want to be political, but please spice up your rank with competent people, that will keep their eyes on the ball and will not drop the ball, and focus on real development, because that's what will enable them to leave legacies. And that's it is on the basis of those kinds of experience, those kinds of moves, endeavors, that they can actually lay claim to real achievement. Right. But in a situation where it's all about patrimony, rewarding loyalty. You know, appointing people on the basis of this is the person I know, this is the person I don't know. They can always be, they will always be a failure because you are an individual as a president. You do not know everybody. You know, but if you go headhunting based on merit, ability, pedigree, you know, intelligence, brilliant results, it will be positive at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you for that. And just beyond that sort of aspects of the discussion, Dr. Ikokwu, I mean, it's interesting how Mr. Tinubu's visit to Port Harcourt has created divisions within his APC party, with the APC in Rivers State distancing itself from that visit, saying that the optics don't look good as they themselves are challenging the PDP, which is the incumbent party in Rivers State, challenging the PDP's victory in the state election. I mean, what's your take on that? And they didn't attend any of the events, and they said they weren't invited either.
Yes, so you're correct, Charles. I mean, from what they say, the optics doesn't look good. However, the president-elect, Bola Tinubu, is a wheeler dealer. People that know him know that, I mean, the man can lobby and he goes for what he wants. He knows the reason why he went to Rivers State. The same thing with the governor of Rivers State, you know, the outgoing governor, Mr. Wike. He is also a very good wheeler dealer. You know, he's a political operator. And both of them, they all have their modus operandi, and they go on and act based on what they're interested in. Wike had, during the elections, fought hard to see that the APC wins Rivers State. Of course, the election is being contested because they say that Labour probably won Rivers State, but through, you know, what he did, it was given to the APC. We'll see, you know, at the end of the day at the tribunal. But the point to make is that he's looking for political relevance. He fought very hard in the PDP to get the ticket for the presidency. He wasn't able to get it, and so he fell out with Atiku Abubakar, who flew the party's flag, and he fought him to a standstill.
Right, we've got about 30 seconds.
Until the election. So the point is both men know what they want. I'm not surprised at all that Bola Tinubu is in Rivers State, and there's a new political partnership between them. Then we'll see how that unfolds in the nearest future.
Okay, and on that note, I want to thank you very much indeed, Dr. Constance Ikokwu, who is a journalist, political affairs commentator, and a Rise News analyst, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, who is a professor of communications and deputy dean of the postgraduate school at Bayes University in Abuja, and of course the journalist and public affairs commentator Lemmy Ughebe, who's also the executive director of Make a Difference Initiative, a civil society organization that promotes transparency, accountability, and good governance. Thank you very much indeed. And apologies that, unfortunately, Senator Ndume could not make it to join us. He's stuck in Port Harcourt, and I actually prefer that he stays there because it wouldn't have been safe flying in bad weather. That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and everyone here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.